not often that I have to say something like this, but kind of obviously these ruminations do contain spoilers for the episodes in question. And one of the things I like to do is talk about the major themes or arcs or otherwise events of a given episode pretty much right at the get-go as sort of an introduction, here's my overarching thought, and now I'm going to try and lead up to and explain that with a big finale. That's usually my overall rumination process right there, right? I just mentioned that because I do know, and this has been confirmed, as of my time of my recording this, which is a decent amount before you'll be seeing this, that several of you, my viewers who regularly watch this channel, the Voyager stuff, you guys have been watching this series along with me. Now, a lot of you have seen this series before, so whatever, right? But I know some of you haven't. And so I just want to mention, as a precaution, if you guys haven't actually seen these episodes, maybe you should watch the episode first and then my thing. Now, that being said, I do know there's at least one gentleman who commented that he will look at my rumination and use that to determine if the episode's worth watching. And that's not a derogatory comment, actually. That makes a lot of sense for a show like Voyager, which is very hit or miss. There's good, and then there's bad, and then there's a whole lot of gray in the middle. But not the Q in the gray. Damn it. So, with that warning out of the way, I have to be honest. I love this episode. I really do. It's a great episode. It's very emotional. It's very evocative. They actually gave Robert Beltran something to do. Robert Beltran was the logical choice for this role, not just because of Chakotay, but because of the actor. And he really, really sells the part. The idea... Forgive me for skipping ahead of my notes here, but, I can't actually imagine that just about any other Starfleet officer would have actually had the same reaction that he did to this whole thing. They would have gone through the same process that he did. Quite the contrary. I imagine he was one of the most inclined to do it because he didn't just become a Maquis like several of the other Maquis did. I mean, people join the Maquis for their own reasons. We know at least 2 people who joined the Maquis not for the cause, but for the outlet. And yet, he joined the cause for the cause. He did it for moral obligation, for standing, for ethics and integrity and all that fun stuff. So someone like that is always going to be far more susceptible to this. And I suppose I'm just dancing around the question. So the point being, I don't actually have that much to say about this episode. I love this episode. It's great. It's wonderful. It's amazing. It's great that this is probably one of the most definitive Chakotay episodes that there is, right up there with Scorpion Part 2. And yet, it's just so much on display there, and it's all well represented within itself that I feel like me trying to explain it or analyze it is just me stating it, as opposed to saying, well, this is this and that and that. All I'm saying is it's green. I don't have that much to say about this episode. This is probably going to be a little bit of a short run. Sorry, guys. But to continue that thread I said earlier, one of the things that I found fascinating, the writers said it had to be Chakotay, and I agree with them totally. By the way, fun fact, I actually, as some of you know, I go digging for behind-the-scenes info, interviews, and little snippets and tweets and all sorts of stuff usually from then, but also more modern stuff. A lot of magazine articles, for example, a lot of stuff from TV Guide, all the things that were out at the time. Remember back when Star Trek magazines were commonplace? Anyways, in order to get background info, behind-the-scenes info, because a lot of the times the producers and creators and writers like to talk about episodes on an individual basis, so it's a wealth of information. There's almost nothing on this episode. Kenneth Biller wrote it, Jerry Taylor approved it, and really pushed for Chakotay to be in it. And that's really all I have to say about it from behind-the-scenes perspective, because that's all they had to say about it. That's it. I mean, that's all there was. There was no real information here. Not really. There wasn't even a discussion about whether or not those actually were Nausicaan masks they were modifying for the use in I forget the race name. Very unusual. That being said, so at least I'm not alone in not having much to say about this episode. That being said, Chakotay was pushed for it. I totally agree on that. But one of the other ideas that was tossed out there at the time was Harry Kim. Now, I find that to be interesting because we've already done an episode like that. It was called The Shoot. And the whole purpose was to show that Harry Kim would not break, despite everything. And they had to cheat in that episode, too, because time, in addition to stress, is what will do that to a person's psyche. And they didn't have time in an episode. I talked about this in The Shoot with regards to the O'Brien situation, which was also a similar concept. So I kind of get that they couldn't do that here, but it is interesting if they could have taken the episode in a different direction and tried to do something else. But even saying that, I don't say that. I'm not saying that's what should have happened. Quite the contrary. I actually think Chakotay was the perfect choice because Chakotay would have fallen for the brainwashing. However, one interesting thought. Would it not have been interesting for certain types of Starfleet people who, generalization here, tend to be caring, compassionate, giving a damn, empathetic, sympathetic? Would it not be interesting for someone like that to have gone through this, who is Starfleet, not Maquis? Because Chakotay is all those things, but he's Maquis. So a Starfleet officer going through all that, and then having the same reaction that Chakotay did. Think about that. I mean, because the whole point of this brainwashing, and the way they do it is admittedly insidiously brilliant, is they show, they go out of their way to show you that their side is the good guys. They really do. Pay attention to how far these people go out of their way to reach their arm out to Chakotay. Let him go. Take care of him. Watch after him. Go for this. Die for him if need be. At all points in time, they're doing things that it was almost unbelievable. The whole time, the back of my mind, when I first saw this episode, I'm like, oh God, trap. It's that gamer instinct right back there. It's what I like to call that, the gamer instinct. When things are going really well, that's when you know things are really bad, that kind of a thing. So it's like, trap, and then they die for him, and then he hits the village. And the villagers are like, you're wonderful, and we praise you, and we offer you food and comfort. And it's like, trap, because it's just getting worse. But the point is, they go through all this point to show you the good guys, then the innocents, then the bad guys. It's very incremental, the way their brainwashing works, and it makes perfect sense. Show you that we are trying to help you out at all turns. Show you the people we are fighting to defend, and then show you what we are fighting against to defend it. Now, that being said, and this is also a classic, admittedly, I tend to call this a Galaxy 4 situation. I hope at least some of you know what I'm talking about before I explain it. Feel free to put in the comments if you know what I'm talking about before I explain it, which I will now explain. There was actually a serial on Doctor Who, First Doctor, way back in the day, called Galaxy 4, and it was about the Brahmin or Draven or something like that. I can't remember. But anyways, it was this race of women, and the fact that they're female is almost irrelevant. I don't want to get into too much of a tangent. The point is, it was people who looked normal and otherwise were like, oh my God, help us, fighting against these horrible, horrific monsters. Now, this was a while ago, but the idea at the time was actually quite revolutionary. Nowadays, it's a little more commonplace, because the idea is, yes, the normal-looking people were the monsters, and the monsters were not. It's funny, I just did a video on Far Cry recently, which kind of talked about the same concept. But yeah, the whole idea is that, the people who look like us and are nice and kind and taking care of us are actually our enemy. And yet, there's a little bit of a gray niggle there. I'll talk about that last, but I just wanted to comment on that. It's an interesting little segue into that. One of the other things that this episode does, again, in similarity to Far Cry 3, is there's a lot of implication in perspective and context. Perspective, of course, means everything, and we only know what the characters know for the most part. In fact, the way they do this is beautiful. It's like, Chakotay has been taken, but oh my God, there's these horrible people, and then it cuts to Voyager. This was really well done, in all honesty. And it's a magic trick. For those of you who don't know, a magic trick, really, when it comes down to it, is all about keeping your attention here so they could do something here. That really is the fundamental of a magic trick, right? So they kept your attention on the situation as a standard setup to make sure that you thought this is what was happening and nothing else, and to try and keep you focused over here, right? And so when, like I said, trap, but then it goes to Voyager and they talk about, oh my God, he's on this planet and these horrible, barbarous people who they call their Nemesis are fighting them, and it's all done basically using the pronoun game, but it's written well enough that you wouldn't notice it if you're not paying attention. Now, admittedly, this time I caught it, but it's very easy to understand why I didn't the first time around. They're, of course, speaking in reverse. And the reveal doesn't come until like 30 minutes into the episode. 30 minutes in, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, by the way, Voyager has the race that Voyager's been talking with that's been nice and kind and helpful is the other side. And Chakotay has been trapped by... Yeah, you see where that comes. Very well done, I might add. But the thing I brought up about perspective is super important. Because for the most part, when we are on Chakotay's viewpoint, we don't know what he's actually seeing. Now, I know you're thinking, well, yes we do, it's right there on the camera. Remember when he saw Tuvok? Tuvok's voice and appearance were both different, were both wrong. Now, why is that? Now, as the doctor later comments, he was on some very, very big chemicals and drugs. The kind that would make you incredibly suggestive and incredibly hallucinatory. The kind that would override your senses. Hence why he didn't recognize Tuvok. He just saw a target, an enemy. Nemesis, if you will. And yet, my point is, we don't know how much of what he saw was what he saw at any given point in time. We do know they used at least some holographic stuff. We do know they had actual sets and, for lack of a better term, actors who are playing a role, like the villagers, for example. But everything else, who knows? And it's interesting to point that out because this goes all the way back to the, oh shoot, I can't think of his name. It's one of the old philosophers. The idea of if you can control someone's senses, if a spirit could control my senses to convince me of something, how would I have the ability to know otherwise? It's that same concept brought into a modern era. They could control what Chakotay thinks simply by being patient and constantly feeding him the right kind of input. It's probably the most horrifically insidious kind of brainwashing because it doesn't involve hooking you up to something that literally tries to rewrite your brain through pain or suffering or reprogramming or mind control or anything like that. It does it through affecting your input and time. Experience, in other words. You actually, at least you think you do, experience so many of the things that you go through, right? And that changes your mind over time because you are an adaptable being. That's what the mind is. Now, moving on a little bit. Wow, I don't actually have that many other notes here. In fact, I only have 2. I told you this would be short. I want to mention something really quick. This is my notes right here. These are my notes for this episode. It's nothing compared to my usual, right? But I just want to point this out. And again, this is not a flaw of the episode. It's a great episode. I really recommend watching it if you haven't already. But right up until there, these notes right here was all I had written down by about the 14-minute point. I remember looking down at the clock and saying 14 minutes, and then looking at my notes, which was sitting in my lap, as it always is. And that's all I had. I had like 1, 2, 3, 4. I had 4 notes dotted down, and that was it. And I'm sitting here like, what the heck? What do I have to say about this? It wasn't actually until the episode was over and I was still digesting it that I came up with these final 2 points, which I'm about to share with you. Otherwise, I'd be done. What I tend to see in this is possibility. The reason this episode is horrifying is obvious. Chakotay's reaction to the gentleman who came up and expressed genuinely that he was thankful that they would get him out safely. It's hard for some people to understand what it is to be like that. I actually understand that personally. I understand that kind of, and for me it's actually an anxiety/fear thing, which is covered, hidden by anger, but there's no actual anger in my case. But it's the same reflexive response. It's a reflexive emotional response you don't actually control because you logically know it's not right. So even Chakotay, knowing what they were saying was correct, knowing he was being influenced, knowing he was being brainwashed, still cannot avoid that automatic emotional response. And I like the fact that the episode doesn't resolve that. That final line about, I wish it was harder to stop hating than to start. That's also kind of indicative because ultimately that is the point, isn't it? I know this sounds weird, but this is actually speaking to the idealistic Roddenberry future. Really, it is. The whole point of the idealistic Roddenberry future was that we'd learn to stop hating. And it took us the eugenics wars and World War III and the Vulcans to do that. And I know that sounds dismissive, and it's because I'm summarizing, but those are 3 gargantuan things in order to convince the human race to stop hating. And even then, it wasn't perfect. And it's true, isn't it? It is so much more difficult to stop something than it is to start. That's true in so many aspects of life, especially when it comes to social interactions and emotional interactions. But the point I want to make here is that wouldn't it be really messed up if both sides were just as bad? The episode does a good job of making it intentionally vague as to how bad the other side is. I forget their name, the Nausicaan-looking guys. Granted, they do assist Voyager in recovering him, and they do try to help with that thing. Yes, definitely makes sense. However, in a war that has waged for a measure of time that is called decades, aiding a foreign power which has been embroiled in your conflict in the effort to get on their good side to help you against your enemies is something that is a very feasible tactic, strategically speaking. And it would not surprise me at all if the leadership of the Nausicaan people said, yes, go help them, do anything you can, because there is a chance that they might assist us. And even if they don't assist us long term, they'll help us win this battle, that kind of a thing. It would be worth the time, effort, and resources, in other words. Just some food for thought. Because, again, they mentioned both times that the same complaints are leveled at both sides. The same arguments are leveled at both sides. Both sides call the other their nemesis. Both sides claim the other does atrocities. We don't actually know what the truth is here. All we know is that Chakotay was taken by one side to be brainwashed, and then he was being assisted and rescued by the other. But that doesn't prove anything. Which brings me to my final point. Wouldn't it be interesting if this is the kind of war that has happened in real life? I am sad to admit. But possibly not to this extreme. The kind of war where the leadership is waging it to the severe and total detriment of its own people, to the point where it would not be facetious to actually say that the leadership of both sides are waging a war against their own people, effectively. Remember, we hear that they actually conscript their own people using this process. They brainwash their own people to fight their enemies, their nemesis. And it is entirely possible the other side does the same thing, to whatever extent or degree. And the funny thing is, you could almost cynically call that training. But again, if you go and commit these kind of atrocities against your own people and are brainwashing your own people into functionally becoming a fighting force for something that the people themselves probably wouldn't want otherwise, at least based on what I see from... This is interpretive. This is all interpretive, of course. Yeah, I think at that point you have officially declared war on yourself, on your own people, and that is vile. And yet that's the point of the whole episode, isn't it? Really, the whole point of the episode is how wrong and horrible hatred and violence really are. I know that sounds like an obvious statement, but I am one of those people who agree that it needs to be restated every now and again, even if it's in Star Trek, because it's true. Violence and hatred are horrible, horrible things in real life. And the idea that they can lead to a degeneration of your ethics, of your morality, of your soul, if you believe in such things, of your spirit, if you believe in such things, the fact that they can bring you down to literally make you worse or less of a person is exactly what this episode is all about, in my opinion. Would it not be interesting, if horrible, if these two sides, again, had become so embroiled in their own hatred and their own violence that they had descended into this level of warfare against their own people, that's why this happened. Remember I forget their names in the previous episode, who had become so desperate as to literally become the oppressors themselves? Desperation will do weird things to you. I wonder if these guys are an STO. God, one of these days I'm going to play Delta Rising, I swear. I'll see you next episode, guys, in a hopefully lighter-hearted episode. Let's see, what's the next one? Oh yeah, Revulsion. I'll see you one, guys.